You know that moment when your entire world shatters? When everything you've built, everything you've worked for gets ripped away in a single instant. I've lived that moment. I watched a woman I barely knew tear up my contract with her perfectly manicured hands, a cruel smile playing on her lips as the pieces of paper fell like snow onto her husband's mahogany desk. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You're nothing. You were never anything. And now you're gone." But here's what she didn't know. Here's what neither of them knew. That contract, it was just paper. The real power was locked away in a patent office downtown, registered in my name, worth $180 million. And they were about to find out the hard way that sometimes the person you step on is the one holding all the cards. Before we get into this story, before I tell you how I brought down an empire built on my own creation, I need you to do something for me. Smash that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Because what I'm about to share with you, this journey of betrayal and revenge, it's going to take us to some dark places before we see the light. And I want to know I'm not alone in this. Let me take you back to where it all began. Not to the moment she shredded my contract, but to the moment I shredded my last shred of doubt and walked into their lives with the invention that would change everything. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and 6 years ago I was nobody special. At least that's what most people would have said. I was a 32-year-old chemical engineer working from a converted garage in Portland, surviving on instant noodles and pure stubbornness. My apartment was small, my bank account was smaller, but my dreams, those were massive. See, I'd spent the last 8 years of my life obsessed with one thing, creating a biodegradable plastic alternative that actually worked. Not the kind that sort of breaks down over 50 years. Not the kind that only degrades under perfect laboratory conditions. I'm talking about a material that could replace traditional plastics, hold up under real-world conditions, and then completely decompose within 6 months when exposed to normal environmental factors. No microplastics. No toxic residue. Just gone, back to the earth like it was never there. Everyone told me it was impossible. My professors in grad school said I was chasing fantasy. The few investors I pitched to in my 20s laughed me out of their offices. One guy actually told me to stick to realistic goals, sweetheart, and I'll never forget the condescending pat on my shoulder that came with those words. But I couldn't let it go. Every time I saw images of ocean gyres filled with plastic, every time I read about animals dying with stomachs full of bottle caps and straws, something in me burned hotter. So I kept going. I worked 3 jobs to fund my research. I waitressed at a diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then I'd rush home, change clothes, and spend 4 hours as a virtual assistant for a tech startup. Evenings and nights were mine, all mine, dedicated to my lab, which was really just my garage filled with equipment I'd bought secondhand or built myself. Weekends I tutored chemistry students online. I didn't date. I didn't go out. I didn't have friends over, because I didn't have time for friends. People thought I was crazy. My mom worried I was throwing my life away. My sister stopped calling because every conversation was about polymers and molecular bonds, and I could hear the boredom in her voice. But I didn't care. I had a vision, and I was going to make it real or die trying. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night at 2:15 in the morning. I'd been working on modifying the molecular structure of a plant-based polymer, trying to get the strength-to-degradation ratio right. I'd failed this particular test about 200 times before. But that night, that specific combination of materials and catalysts and processing techniques, it worked. It actually worked. I still remember standing in my garage, holding this small sheet of material in my shaking hands, running every test I could think of. It was strong, flexible, heat-resistant, water-resistant, and according to my calculations, it would start breaking down within weeks of being exposed to soil bacteria or marine environments. I cried. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I sat down on my garage floor surrounded by beakers and Bunsen burners, and I sobbed like a baby because I'd done it. After 8 years of people telling me I was wasting my time, I'd actually done it. The next 3 months were a blur. I documented everything meticulously. I ran every test I could think of and then some. I reached out to a patent attorney who worked on contingency because I definitely couldn't afford his normal rates. His name was Marcus Webb, and he was the first person who looked at my work and saw what I saw. Not a pipe dream, not a crazy woman's obsession, but a genuine, world-changing innovation. "Sarah," he told me during our third meeting, "if this does everything you say it does, and if the testing backs it up, you're not looking at a small patent. You're looking at something that could revolutionize multiple industries. Packaging, agriculture, medical supplies, consumer goods. This is big, really big." We filed for the patent. Marcus insisted on one thing that probably saved my life, though I didn't know it at the time. "Keep this in your name," he said. "Don't assign it to a company yet. Don't sign it over to anyone until you're absolutely sure of what you're getting in return. The patent is your leverage. Never forget that." I listened to him. Thank God I listened to him. While we waited for the patent to process, I needed to figure out how to actually bring this to market. I was an engineer, not a business person. I didn't have the first clue about manufacturing, distribution, marketing, any of it. I needed a partner. I needed someone with resources and connections and business savvy. That's when I met Richard Chen. I'd managed to get a spot at a green technology expo in Seattle, just a tiny booth in the back corner that cost me nearly every penny I had left. I brought samples of my material and information packets I'd printed at home. Most people walked right past me, but Richard stopped. He was 45, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my car. He had this air of confidence that came from years of success, but his eyes were kind. Curious. He picked up one of my samples, examined it, and then looked at me with genuine interest. "Tell me about this," he said. So I did. I gave him my entire pitch, refined from months of rejection and practice. I showed him the test results. I explained the potential applications. And he listened, really listened. Not with that glazed-over look I was used to, but with focused attention that made me feel like what I was saying actually mattered. "This is remarkable," he finally said. "I own a plastics manufacturing company. We've been looking to pivot towards sustainable materials, but everything on the market has significant drawbacks. If your material performs the way you say it does, and if you can scale the production process, this could be exactly what we need." My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. "Are you saying you want to work together?" He smiled. It was a warm smile, genuine, or at least that's what I thought at the time. "I'm saying I want to learn more. Can you come to my office next week? Bring all your documentation, your test results, everything. Let's see if we can make something happen." I floated out of that expo. I called Marcus immediately and told him everything. He was cautiously optimistic. "Do your homework on this guy," he advised. "Make sure he's legitimate. And Sarah, remember what I said. You keep that patent in your name until we have an ironclad agreement." I did my homework. Richard Chen was the real deal. He'd built Chen Industries from nothing into a $50 million plastics manufacturing company over 20 years. He had contracts with major brands, a state-of-the-art facility, and a reputation for being tough but fair in business. There were no scandals, no lawsuits, no red flags. He seemed perfect. Our next meeting was at his office, a sleek modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. His conference room was bigger than my entire apartment. He'd brought his chief technical officer and his head of operations. I brought Marcus and my binder full of documentation that I'd practically memorized. The meeting lasted 4 hours. They asked every question imaginable. They examined my samples. They reviewed my test data. The CTO ran some calculations on production scalability, and at the end of it all, Richard leaned back in his chair and said the words that changed my life. "Sarah, I want to make you an offer. Partner with us. We'll handle all the manufacturing, distribution, marketing, and business operations. You'll continue to develop and refine the material, oversee quality control, and lead the technical side. We'll split the profits 60-40, with the larger share going to Chen Industries initially to recoup the startup costs, then moving to a 50-50 split once we hit profitability. You'll have a full salary, benefits, a real lab with proper equipment and staff. We'll make this material a household name, and we'll both become very wealthy in the process." I looked at Marcus. He was taking notes, his expression carefully neutral. "We'll need to see all of that in writing," he said, with very specific terms about Ms. Mitchell's role, her control over the technical development, and the exact timeline for the profit-sharing structure. "Of course," Richard said smoothly. "I'll have my lawyers draft a comprehensive agreement. This is too important to rush. We'll make sure everything is crystal clear and fair to both parties." It took 6 weeks to negotiate the contract. Marcus earned every penny of his contingency fee during those weeks, fighting for terms that protected me and my interests. The final agreement was 47 pages long. It guaranteed me a salary of $120,000 a year, which felt like a fortune to someone who'd been living on ramen. It gave me complete control over the technical development and quality standards. It spelled out exactly how profits would be calculated and divided. And most importantly, it confirmed that I retained ownership of the patent, with Chen Industries having an exclusive license to use the technology as long as they met certain conditions. I signed it on a Friday afternoon in Richard's office. We shook hands. He seemed genuinely happy, and so was I. I thought I'd found the perfect partner. I thought this was the beginning of my dream coming true. And you know what? For the first 2 years, it really was. Richard gave me everything he'd promised. He converted an entire section of his facility into a state-of-the-art research and development lab, just for me and my work. He hired 2 lab assistants to help me scale up the production process. He brought in industrial engineers who worked with me to design manufacturing systems that could produce my material in commercial quantities without compromising its properties. I actually got to do what I loved. No more waiting tables. No more juggling 3 jobs. I woke up every morning and went to a real lab with real equipment and worked on making my invention better. I refined the formula to improve its strength. I developed variations optimized for different applications, one version for packaging, another for agricultural films, another for medical supplies. Every breakthrough felt like a victory. And the market responded. Richard's sales team started landing contracts. First small ones with eco-conscious startups and boutique brands, then bigger ones. A major organic food company switched their packaging to our material. A cosmetics brand featured our biodegradable containers in a major marketing campaign. An agricultural supplier started using our films for mulching, and farmers reported better soil health after the material decomposed. The orders kept growing. 6 months in, we were at capacity in our production facility. Richard invested another $5 million to expand. We hired more staff. We added production lines. Revenue climbed from $1 million in our first year to $8 million in our second year. We weren't just profitable, we were becoming a genuine success story. Richard and I met every Monday morning to review progress and discuss strategy. He valued my input, or at least he seemed to. He'd ask my opinion on potential new contracts, on expansion plans, on hearing decisions. He introduced me to clients as the brilliant mind behind our revolutionary material, and I'd feel a flush of pride every single time. I was happy, genuinely happy. I'd wake up excited to go to work. I had a nice apartment now, a new car, money in savings for the first time in my adult life. My mom stopped worrying about me. My sister asked me for career advice. I felt like I'd finally proven everyone wrong, shown them that my crazy obsession had been worth it. But then everything changed. It started small. Little things I didn't think much about at the time. Richard mentioned he was getting remarried. His first marriage had ended years before I met him, and he'd been single all the time I'd known him. He seemed happy about it, lighter somehow, and I was genuinely glad for him. "Her name is Victoria," he told me one Monday morning, showing me a picture on his phone. She was stunning. Blonde, perfectly styled, with the kind of beauty that looked professionally maintained. "We met at a charity gala 8 months ago. She's amazing, Sarah. Smart, sophisticated, ambitious. I think you two will get along great." I smiled and said all the right things, but something about the way he said ambitious stuck with me. There was an edge to it, a hint of something I couldn't quite name. I met Victoria 3 weeks later. Richard threw a dinner party to celebrate their engagement and introduce her to key people in his life. That included me, apparently. since I was his business partner and the architect of the company's fastest-growing division. The dinner was at an upscale restaurant, the kind where the menu doesn't have prices and the wine list reads like a novel. I wore the nicest dress I owned and still felt underdressed the moment I walked in. Victoria was there, draped on Richard's arm, wearing a white cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She was even more striking in person, tall, graceful, with piercing blue eyes and a smile that showed perfect white teeth. "Sarah," Richard beamed when he saw me. "Come meet Victoria. Victoria, this is Sarah Mitchell, the genius I've been telling you about." Victoria extended her hand and I shook it. Her grip was firm, her skin cool and soft. "Sarah," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Richard talks about you constantly, the woman who invented the miracle material. How exciting." There was something about the way she said it. Not quite mocking, but not quite sincere either. Like she was saying words she thought she should say rather than words she meant. "It's nice to meet you," I replied. "Congratulations on your engagement." "Thank you." She smiled that perfect smile again and turned her attention back to Richard, threading her arm through his possessively. "Darling, we should sit. I'm absolutely starving." Dinner was fine. Pleasant, even. Victoria was charming, funny, well-traveled. She told entertaining stories about her time living in Paris and New York. She asked questions that seemed interested in people's lives. But I noticed things. The way she'd steer conversation away whenever Richard started talking too enthusiastically about the business. The way her smile would tighten just slightly when he mentioned our success. The way she'd touch his arm and change the subject whenever my work came up. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself I was just being paranoid or maybe a little jealous, that I was losing some of Richard's attention to his new relationship. I convinced myself it was nothing. I should have trusted my instincts. The wedding was 3 months later. Lavish, expensive, picture perfect. I was invited, though I got the sense it was because Richard insisted rather than because Victoria wanted me there. I went, gave them a nice gift, stayed for a polite amount of time, and left early claiming I had work the next day. After the wedding, things started to shift in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. Victoria started showing up at the office. At first, it was just occasional visits, bringing Richard lunch or meeting him for dinner. But then she started staying longer, sitting in on meetings, asking questions about operations and finances. Richard seemed fine with it, even pleased that she was taking an interest in his work. But her interest wasn't in the work. I realized that soon enough. Her interest was in control. She'd make little comments. "Do we really need such a large R&D budget for one material? Or wouldn't it be more efficient to outsource the technical development to a contracted lab?" Or my personal favorite, "I'm sure we could find someone to manage the lab for half of Sarah's salary." Richard would laugh these comments off, at least at first. "Victoria, honey, you don't understand. Sarah's not just a lab manager. She's the creator. She's irreplaceable." But I could see the seed being planted. I could see Victoria's perfectly manicured fingers wrapping around Richard's business, and by extension, around my life's work. The Monday morning meetings started including Victoria. She wasn't officially part of the company. She had no title, no role, no expertise in plastics or manufacturing or chemistry. But there she was, sitting next to Richard, offering opinions on things she knew nothing about. She questioned every decision I made. If I wanted to hire another lab assistant, she'd argue we didn't need one. If I wanted to invest in new testing equipment, she'd suggest we wait until next quarter. If I proposed developing a new variation of the material for a specific application, she'd question whether it was worth the development costs. And slowly, so slowly I almost didn't notice it happening, Richard started listening to her more than he listened to me. Our 50-50 partnership that was supposed to kick in at profitability. Suddenly, Richard was saying maybe we should wait another year to make sure we were stable. That bonus structure for landing major contracts. He thought maybe we should revisit those terms. That expansion of my lab I'd been promised. Put on hold indefinitely because Victoria thought we should consolidate resources. I tried to talk to Richard alone, but Victoria was always there. Always hovering. Always inserting herself between us. The warm, collaborative relationship we'd built over 2 years started feeling cold and transactional. And then came the day that changed everything. The day I walked into Richard's office for our Monday morning meeting and found Victoria sitting behind his desk instead of beside it. She looked up at me with those ice-blue eyes and smiled. But this time, there was no pretense of warmth. This smile was pure triumph. "Sarah," she said, leaning back in Richard's chair like she owned it, "we need to talk about your future with this company." My heart started pounding the moment those words left her mouth. "My future?" I repeated, still standing in the doorway. "Where's Richard?" "Richard is busy," Victoria said smoothly, gesturing to the chair across from the desk. "Please sit down." I didn't want to sit. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to turn around and walk out. But I needed to know what was happening, so I sat down on the edge of the chair, my back straight, my hands gripped together in my lap. Victoria opened a folder on the desk and made a show of reviewing the papers inside, taking her time, making me wait. The silence stretched out between us like a tightening wire. Finally, she looked up. "Sarah, let's be honest with each other," she began, her tone as casual as if we were discussing the weather. "You've done good work here. The initial development of the material was impressive, but the reality is this company has moved beyond the startup phase. We're a real business now, with major clients and serious growth potential. And frankly, we can't afford to keep operating with the outdated structure you and Richard agreed to years ago." "Outdated structure?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "I'm not sure what you mean. Our agreement has been working perfectly fine." Victoria's smile tightened just a fraction. "Has it, though? Your salary alone represents a significant overhead cost, and the resources dedicated to your lab could be better allocated now that the material is fully developed. We don't need ongoing R&D at this scale. What we need is efficient production and aggressive sales growth." I felt ice forming in my veins. The material isn't just fully developed and done. It requires ongoing refinement, quality control, adaptation for new applications. You can't just... "We can hire a quality control manager for a fraction of what we're paying you," Victoria interrupted, her voice still perfectly pleasant, which somehow made it worse. "Someone whose sole focus is maintaining production standards, not chasing expensive research projects that may or may not pan out." "Those research projects have led to every single variation that's landed us major contracts," I shot back. "The agricultural film, that was 6 months of development work. The medical-grade version, 8 months. You can't just..." "Sarah," Victoria closed the folder and folded her hands on top of it. "I'm not here to debate the past. I'm here to discuss the future. We're restructuring the company. We're making changes that will improve efficiency and profitability. And unfortunately, those changes don't include your current role or compensation level." The room felt like it was tilting. "You can't just change my role. I have a contract." "About that," Victoria opened a drawer and pulled out a familiar-looking document. My contract. The 47-page agreement that Marcus had spent weeks negotiating. She lifted it up so I could see it clearly, and then, maintaining eye contact with me the entire time, she began tearing it in half. I lurched forward in my chair. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. She just kept tearing. The sound of paper ripping filled the room, obscenely loud in the silence. She tore it once, twice, 3 times, until my contract was nothing but pieces in her hands. Then she opened her fingers and let the shreds fall onto the desk like confetti. "There," she said with satisfaction. "Now we don't have to worry about that outdated agreement anymore." I was on my feet without even realizing I'd stood up. "You can't do that. You can't just destroy a legal contract and pretend it doesn't exist. That's not how any of this works." "Oh, Sarah." Victoria stood up too, and even though I was taller than her, somehow she made me feel small. "You really don't understand how the world works, do you? Richard and I have consulted with our attorneys. That contract had several clauses that were improperly executed. Technicalities, but enough to make it legally questionable at best. You could try to fight it in court, of course. How much money do you have for lawyers? 50,000? 100,000? Because we have millions. We could keep you tied up in litigation for years. By the time it was resolved, You'd be broke and broken. My hands were shaking. Richard wouldn't do this. He wouldn't just throw away our partnership, everything we've built together. Richard does what I tell him to do, Victoria said, and the mask of pleasantness finally fell away completely. What I saw underneath was cold and hard and utterly without mercy. He's my husband. His loyalty is to me now, not to some girl he felt sorry for at a trade show. The contempt in her voice hit me like a slap. I'm not some girl. I'm the person who created the technology that's making this company millions of dollars. You created a formula, Victoria corrected. The company turned it into a business. There's a difference. And here's what's going to happen now. You're going to clean out your lab today. Security will escort you from the building. We'll send you 2 weeks severance pay as a courtesy, but your employment with Chen Industries is terminated effective immediately. The world was spinning. This couldn't be happening. It couldn't be real. You're firing me. You're firing me from a company built on my invention. We're restructuring, and your position has been eliminated, Victoria said with a dismissive wave. The material will continue to be produced under Chen Industries. We own the manufacturing processes, the client relationships, the supply chains, everything that actually matters in running a business. You're free to go develop other materials on your own time. I'm sure you'll find another small company willing to take a chance on you eventually. I need to talk to Richard. I was barely holding myself together. I need to hear this from him directly. Richard agrees with every word I've said. Victoria walked around the desk, moving toward me like a predator approaching cornered prey. He's finally seeing clearly after years of being blinded by misplaced loyalty. You were useful once. You're not anymore. It's just business, Sarah. Nothing personal. Nothing personal, my voice cracked. You just destroyed my contract and fired me from my own company, and you're saying it's nothing personal. It's not your company, Victoria said, and her smile returned, sharp and vicious. It never was. You were an employee, and now you're not even that. The door behind me opened, and I spun around. 2 security guards stood there, looking uncomfortable but determined. Behind them, I could see some of my coworkers peering down the hallway, drawn by the sound of raised voices. Ms. Mitchell needs to collect her personal belongings and vacate the premises, Victoria told the guards, her voice carrying down the hall, making sure everyone heard, making sure everyone knew I was being thrown out like garbage. Please escort her to the lab and then to the exit. This isn't over, I said, turning back to Victoria. My voice was shaking, but I forced the words out anyway. I'm going to fight this. You can't just steal my work. Victoria actually laughed. Your work, sweetheart, look around. This is Richard's facility, Richard's equipment, Richard's manufacturing processes, Richard's contracts, Richard's company. What exactly do you think you have to fight with? I didn't have an answer. Not then. I was too shocked, too hurt, too overwhelmed by the sudden destruction of everything I'd built. So I did the only thing I could do. I walked out of that office, flanked by security guards like a criminal, and made my way to my lab. My lab, the space that had been my haven for 2 years, the place where I'd refined my formula and developed new variations and felt like I was actually changing the world. My assistants were there, working at their stations. They looked up when I came in with the security guards, their faces confused and concerned. Sarah, what's going on? I couldn't speak. If I tried to explain, I'd break down completely, and I wasn't going to give Victoria the satisfaction of hearing that I'd cried. I just started gathering my personal belongings. Pictures from my desk, a few books, some notebooks with my personal research notes, though the guards watched me carefully to make sure I wasn't taking anything they considered company property. It took 15 minutes to pack up 2 years of my life into a single cardboard box. 15 minutes to be erased from the place where my invention had come to life. The security guards walked me through the facility, past people I'd worked with, past production lines running my material through processes I'd helped design, past the break room where I'd celebrated our first major contract, past conference rooms where I'd presented my ideas and been told they were brilliant. And then I was outside in the parking lot, standing next to my car with a box of belongings and absolutely no idea what to do next. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could even turn the key in the ignition. My hands were shaking too badly. My mind was racing through everything that had just happened, trying to make sense of it, trying to find a foothold in the disaster my life had just become. Finally, I drove home. I made it all the way into my apartment, closed and locked the door behind me, and then I collapsed. I sank down onto the floor with my back against the door and I cried. I cried for the betrayal. I cried for the humiliation. I cried for the loss of something I'd thought was secure. I'd been so stupid, so naive. I'd trusted Richard. I'd believed in our partnership. And he'd let his wife destroy it all without even having the courage to face me himself. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor. Eventually, the tears stopped because there were no more left to cry. I felt hollow, empty, like someone had reached inside my chest and scooped out everything that mattered. But as the shock began to wear off, something else started creeping in. A small voice in the back of my mind, quiet at first but growing louder. A voice that sounded suspiciously like Marcus Webb, my patent attorney. "Keep this in your name. The patent is your leverage. Never forget that." I scrambled to my feet and rushed to my desk, pulling open the drawer where I kept important documents. My hands were still shaking as I rifled through folders. Birth certificate, passport, car title, and there it was. The patent registration. Official, legal, unquestionable. Patent number US 9,847,362. Biodegradable polymer composition and method of manufacture. Inventor and owner, Sarah Jane Mitchell. Not Chen Industries, not Richard Chen, not Victoria Chen, me. I stood there staring at that document as the full reality of the situation began to sink in. Victoria had destroyed my employment contract. She'd fired me from the company. She'd humiliated me and thrown me out. But she hadn't touched the one thing that actually mattered. She couldn't, because she didn't even know it existed. The contract Richard and I had signed gave Chen Industries an exclusive license to use my patent. But that license had conditions. I pulled out my copy of the contract, the one Marcus had insisted I keep in my personal files, and started reading through it with new eyes. The shredded pieces on Victoria's desk didn't matter. This copy was just as legal, and more importantly, the patent itself existed independently of any contract. My hands stopped shaking as I read through the terms. The exclusive license granted to Chen Industries was contingent on several conditions. They had to maintain certain quality standards. They had to pay me the agreed-upon profit sharing. They had to keep me in an active technical role with final say on quality control. And if they violated any of these material terms, the license could be terminated. They just violated every single one. I grabbed my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the third ring. "Sarah, I wasn't expecting to hear from you today. How are things?" "They fired me." The words came tumbling out. Victoria Chen, Richard's wife, she literally tore up my contract in front of me and had security escort me out of the building. There was a long pause. Then Marcus said very carefully, "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." I told him every detail. Victoria sitting in Richard's chair, the restructuring speech, the way she tore up the contract, the humiliation of being walked out by security. When I finished, there was another long pause. "Sarah," Marcus finally said, and I could hear something in his voice that I couldn't quite identify. "Do you still have your copy of the contract?" "Yes, it's right here in front of me." "And the patent is still in your name?" "Yes, I'm looking at the registration right now." "And they know the patent is in your name, right? Richard knows this. We were very clear about it during negotiations." "Richard knows, or he should know. I don't know if he ever told Victoria." A cold realization was settling over me. "Marcus, I don't think she knows. I think she thinks the patent belongs to the company. That's why she felt so confident destroying the contract and throwing me out." Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been shock. "Oh, Sarah, oh, this is... Okay, listen to me very carefully. Don't call them, don't email them, don't communicate with them at all. I need you to come to my office first thing tomorrow morning. Bring your copy of the contract, the patent registration, and any documentation you have about your work at Chen Industries. Can you do that? Yes, but Marcus, what? Tomorrow, he interrupted. We'll talk about everything tomorrow. But Sarah, if what you're telling me is accurate, if they've violated the material terms of your agreement and they don't realize the patent is in your name, they've made a very, very expensive mistake. After we hung up, I sat at my desk and stared at the patent registration. The hollow, empty feeling was gone. In its place was something bright and fierce and burning. They'd tried to destroy me. They'd treated me like I was nothing, like I was disposable. But they'd forgotten one crucial thing. You can't manufacture a patented material without the patent holder's permission. And I had just become very, very motivated to remind them of that fact. I didn't sleep that night. I spent the hours until morning going through every document, every email, every piece of evidence that showed what I'd created and what I'd contributed to Chen Industries. I documented every violation of our contract terms, every decision made without my input that should have required it, every delayed payment from the profit-sharing agreement, every instance of Victoria undermining my role and authority. By the time the sun came up, I had built a case. Not just an emotional complaint, but a detailed, documented record of breach of contract. And I had the nuclear option sitting right there in my patent registration. I met Marcus at his office at 9 o'clock sharp. He took one look at my face and shook his head. You didn't sleep. Couldn't. I set down the 2 folders I'd prepared, but I've been productive. We spent 3 hours going through everything. Marcus asked 1,000 questions, took pages of notes, and reviewed every document with the careful attention that had made him such a good attorney. Finally, he sat back in his chair and looked at me. Here's where we stand, he said. They've clearly breached the contract in multiple ways. The termination of your employment alone constitutes a material breach, since the agreement specifically required your ongoing technical role. Add in the failure to pay you the profit sharing that should have kicked in 6 months ago, and we have a strong case for contract violation. But they'll argue the contract isn't valid, I said. Victoria claimed their lawyers found technicalities that make it questionable. Marcus waved a dismissive hand. They're bluffing. I negotiated that contract and I know every word of it is solid. But here's the thing, Sarah. We don't need to fight about the contract, because you have something much more powerful. He tapped the patent registration. This gives you complete control over the technology. Without your permission, they can't legally manufacture or sell the material. The license we granted them was conditional, and they've violated those conditions, which means we can terminate the license. My heart was pounding. If we terminate the license, they can't produce the material at all. Not legally, no. Every unit they manufacture would be patent infringement. Every sale would be illegal. We could shut down their entire operation with a cease and desist letter. Marcus leaned forward. But before we get into that, I need to ask you something important. What do you want out of this? Do you want money? Do you want the company? Do you want revenge? Because the strategy we pursue depends entirely on what your goal is. I thought about Victoria's face as she tore up my contract. The contempt in her voice. The casual cruelty of having me escorted out by security. The way she'd made sure my coworkers saw me being humiliated. I thought about Richard, who'd been too much of a coward to even face me, who'd let his wife destroy a partnership that had made both of us successful. I want them to understand what they've done, I said slowly. I want them to realize that I wasn't some disposable employee they could throw away. I want them to feel exactly what they made me feel. Powerless, humiliated, destroyed. Marcus nodded slowly. Then here's what I propose. We don't contact them yet. We let them think they've won. Let them celebrate getting rid of you. Let them keep manufacturing and selling the material, thinking they're free and clear. We'll monitor the situation and document every unit they produce. And then, once they're in deep enough, once they're completely dependent on that revenue stream, we pull the rug out from under them. How long? I asked. Give it 2 weeks, maybe 3. Long enough for word to spread in the industry that you're no longer with the company. Long enough for them to feel completely secure. And then we hit them with a cease and desist for patent infringement, and we demand compensation for every unit they've produced since they breached the contract. A slow smile spread across my face. They'll panic. They'll do more than panic, Marcus said grimly. If we play this right, we can leverage this situation into whatever outcome you want. Full ownership of the company, a buyout worth tens of millions, total destruction of their business. The choice will be yours, but first we let them hang themselves. I left Marcus's office with a plan, more than a plan, a strategy. For the first time since Victoria had torn up my contract, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't destroyed. I was the one holding all the cards, and they didn't even know they were playing a rigged game. The next 2 weeks were the hardest of my life. I had to stay quiet. I had to resist the urge to call Richard, to send angry emails, to tell everyone who would listen what had happened. I had to watch from the outside as Chen Industries continued operating, using my technology, making money from my invention, while pretending I'd never existed. I monitored their website and saw that they'd already updated the About Us page. My photo was gone. My bio was gone. There was no mention of me anywhere. It was like I'd been erased from the company's history. They'd replaced my role with a quality assurance manager position, and from what I could tell from industry contacts, they'd hired someone for about a third of my salary. Victoria had been busy too. I heard through the grapevine that she'd positioned herself as some kind of strategic advisor to the company, despite having no background in the industry. She was networking aggressively, making connections, building relationships with clients, playing the part of the power behind the throne. Richard sent me the promised 2 weeks severance pay and nothing else. No explanation, no apology, no acknowledgement of the partnership we'd had. Just a check and a form letter about the termination of my employment. That letter was the last piece of evidence Marcus needed. We now had documentation of everything. The breach, the termination, the ongoing use of my patent without valid authorization. On day 16 after my termination, Marcus sent the cease and desist letter. We had it delivered by courier to Richard's office at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. I imagine him opening it with Victoria looking over his shoulder, expecting maybe an angry complaint or a lawsuit we couldn't afford to pursue. Instead, they got a legal letter that very calmly explained the following facts. The patent for the biodegradable polymer was owned solely by Sarah Jane Mitchell. The license granted to Chen Industries was conditional and had been terminated due to material breach of contract. Any continued manufacture, sale, or use of the patented material constituted patent infringement. Chen Industries was required to immediately cease all production and sales. Additionally, they owed compensation for all units produced since the date of contract breach, which Marcus calculated at approximately $12 million based on their production volume and profit margins. The letter gave them 72 hours to respond before we filed a formal lawsuit and sought an emergency injunction. I was at Marcus's office when we knew the letter would have been delivered. My phone was in my hand, turned off, because Marcus had insisted they not be able to reach me yet. Let them sweat, he'd said. Let them panic. Don't give them any way to contact you except through me. We didn't have to wait long. Marcus's phone rang at 11:15. He looked at the caller ID and smiled. Chen Industries Legal Department. He let it ring 3 times before answering, putting it on speaker so I could hear. Marcus Webb. Mr. Webb, this is Jonathan Greer, General Counsel for Chen Industries. I've just been shown a letter you sent to my client that contains some very concerning claims. Concerning and accurate, Marcus said calmly. I assume you've verified the patent registration by now. There was a pause. We're looking into the details of the intellectual property situation. But Mr. Chen is very surprised by this letter, as he had an agreement with Ms. Mitchell regarding the use of the technology. Had is the operative word, Marcus replied. That agreement was terminated when Chen Industries breached its material terms by firing Ms. Mitchell and failing to pay her the agreed-upon profit sharing. I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding that can be resolved amicably. Greer's voice was placating now. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting with all parties to discuss. The letter outlines our terms very clearly, Marcus interrupted. Immediate cessation of all production and compensation for damages. Those are non-negotiable starting points for any discussion. Surely Ms. Mitchell doesn't expect Chen Industries to simply shut down its entire production operation. We have contracts with clients, obligations, people employed in that division. Marcus looked at me. I nodded. Then Chen Industries should have considered those obligations before terminating the patent owner's employment and attempting to continue using her intellectual property without authorization, Marcus said. My client has no interest in helping the people who treated her so poorly, but we're willing to consider proposals. Your clients have 72 hours. He hung up before Greer could respond. I sat back in my chair, my heart racing. That was satisfying. That was just the beginning, Marcus said with a grin. Now they're going to scramble. They'll verify everything we've said. They'll realize we're not bluffing. And then they'll start to understand exactly how much trouble they're in. He was right. Over the next 3 days, my phone, which I turned back on but didn't answer, lit up with calls and messages. Richard called 7 times. Victoria called twice. Their lawyer called 4 times. I didn't respond to any of them. Every call that came in just added to the sense of power I was beginning to feel. On day 3, Marcus received a formal response. Chen Industries acknowledged the validity of the patent and requested a meeting to discuss terms for a mutually beneficial resolution. They wanted to settle. They wanted to negotiate. They wanted me to save them from the disaster they'd created. And I hadn't even begun to show them how bad it could get. Marcus scheduled the meeting for the following Monday at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown office building that neither party had any connection to. He insisted on neutral ground, refusing to meet at their office or even at his. We control the environment, he told me. We control the tone. They come to us. I spent the weekend preparing, not just reviewing documents and strategy, but preparing myself mentally and emotionally for what was about to happen. I was going to walk into a room with the 2 people who had humiliated me, who had treated me like garbage, and I was going to look them in the eye while holding all the power. I needed to be ready for that. Marcus had coached me extensively. They're going to try to manipulate you, he warned. Richard will probably try to appeal to your shared history, the partnership you had. Victoria will either try to intimidate you or play victim, depending on what she thinks will work. Don't engage emotionally. Stay calm. Stay focused. Remember that you have what they need and they have nothing you want anymore. I wore my best suit to that meeting. Navy blue, professional, expensive. I'd bought it with my first big paycheck from Chen Industries, back when I thought I was building a real future there. Now I was wearing it to tear that future away from the people who'd stolen it from me. My hair was pulled back. My makeup was perfect. I looked every inch the successful professional, not the crying woman who'd collapsed on her apartment floor 2 weeks ago. Marcus and I arrived exactly on time. Not early, which would have made us look eager. Not late, which would have looked petty. Exactly on time because we were treating this like the business transaction it was. They were already there. Richard, Victoria, and their lawyer Jonathan Greer. Richard looked terrible. His face was drawn, his eyes had dark circles under them, and his usually impeccable appearance was slightly disheveled. His tie was loose. His shirt had wrinkles. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. Good. Victoria looked as polished as ever, but I could see the tension in the way she held herself. The rigid posture, the tight grip on her clutch purse, the slightly too bright smile she gave us when we entered. Sarah, Richard said, standing up immediately. Thank God, I've been trying to reach you. This whole thing is a terrible misunderstanding and… Mr. Chen, Marcus interrupted smoothly, please direct all communication through me. Ms. Mitchell is here as a courtesy, but I'll be handling all discussions. Richard's face fell. He looked at me, really looked at me, like he was searching for some sign of the woman he used to work with. The woman who'd trusted him. I kept my expression neutral and took my seat across from them without saying a word. The shift in power was palpable. 2 weeks ago, I'd been escorted out of their building by security. Now they were sitting across from me, desperate and afraid, while I held their entire business in the palm of my hand. Jonathan Greer cleared his throat and opened a folder. Thank you both for coming. I think we can resolve this situation in a way that's beneficial for everyone involved. Chen Industries acknowledges that there were some irregularities in Ms. Mitchell's termination. We're prepared to offer reinstatement with full back pay and an apology. I almost laughed. Almost. Marcus didn't even blink. That's not on the table, he said flatly. Ms. Mitchell has no interest in returning to a company that treated her so poorly. Next offer. Victoria spoke up for the first time, her voice sickeningly sweet. Sarah, I think there's been a huge miscommunication. I never meant for things to go the way they did. I was under a lot of stress that day, and I may have overreacted. If I hurt your feelings, I apologize. Can't we just put this behind us and move forward professionally? I met her eyes across the table, those ice blue eyes that had looked at me with such contempt as she shredded my contract. You didn't hurt my feelings, I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since entering the room, and everyone went silent. You destroyed a contract, terminated my employment, had me escorted out by security in front of my colleagues, and attempted to steal the rights to my life's work. That's not a miscommunication. That's not hurt feelings. That's a calculated attack that's going to cost you everything you tried to take from me. Victoria's sweet expression cracked. Now wait just a minute. Ms. Chen, Marcus said sharply, I'd advise you to stop talking. Mr. Greer, do you have a serious offer or are we done here? Greer looked at Richard, who was staring at the table. We're prepared to offer a settlement of $2 million in exchange for a renewed exclusive license to the patent and a mutual non-disclosure agreement. No, I said before Marcus could respond. Absolutely not. Sarah, please, Richard finally spoke, his voice rough. Be reasonable. We built this business together. The company is worth $50 million now. You can't just destroy all of that because of one mistake. One mistake? My voice rose despite my intention to stay calm. You let your wife tear up our contract. You had me thrown out like trash. You erased me from the company history like I never existed. And you didn't even have the courage to face me yourself. You hid behind her and behind security guards and behind lawyers. That's not one mistake, Richard. That's a pattern of cowardice and betrayal. His face flushed red. I was trying to keep the peace in my marriage. Victoria felt threatened by you, by our relationship, and I was trying to balance. You chose wrong, I said coldly, and now you're going to pay for that choice. Victoria slammed her hand on the table. You ungrateful little, she caught herself, but the mask had slipped completely. The polished, sophisticated woman was gone, replaced by someone ugly and desperate. We made you. You were nothing before Richard gave you a chance. You'd still be working in that pathetic garage if not for us. And you'd have nothing without my invention, I shot back. Every dollar Chen Industries makes from that material comes from my work, my research, my innovation. You contributed nothing except greed and cruelty. So no, I'm not grateful, and I'm not interested in your settlement offers. Marcus pulled out a document and slid it across the table. Here's what Ms. Mitchell is willing to consider. Full transfer of ownership of Chen Industries to her. You keep your existing personal assets, but the company becomes hers. In exchange, we won't pursue the $12 million in damages for patent infringement or file a lawsuit that would drag your names through the public courts for years. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard picked up the document with shaking hands and read it. His face went from red to white. You want me to just hand over my company? The company I spent 20 years building. The company that's currently worth $50 million almost entirely because of my client's technology, Marcus said. Without the biodegradable polymer division, what's Chen Industries really worth? Maybe $10 million, being generous. And that $10 million becomes worth nothing if we shut down your ability to produce the one product that's driving all your growth. This is insane, Victoria hissed. We're not giving you the company. We'll fight this in court. Then you'll lose the company anyway, Marcus replied calmly. We'll get an immediate injunction stopping all production. Your clients will cancel their contracts when you can't fulfill orders. Your investors will pull out. Your reputation will be destroyed. And after years of expensive litigation that will drain every resource you have, you'll still lose because the law is very clear on patent rights. This offer is your best option. Actually, it's your only option if you want to walk away with anything at all. Jonathan Greer was looking at the document now, his face grim. As an attorney, he knew Marcus was right. I could see him doing the mental calculations, weighing the legal realities against his client's emotions. Richard was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "I gave you everything," he said, his voice breaking. "I believed in you when no one else would. I invested millions in your research. I built the infrastructure to bring your material to market. And this is how you repay me." Something inside me snapped. All the calm professionalism I'd been maintaining shattered. "You gave me a job," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You gave me a salary in exchange for access to technology that's going to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That's not charity, Richard. That's business. And you know what? I was grateful. I was loyal. I worked my ass off for your company. I made your products better. I landed you major contracts. I helped build your success. And the moment your wife decided I was inconvenient, you threw me away without a second thought. So don't you dare sit there and play the victim. You made your choice. Now live with the consequences." Richard's eyes were wet. He looked old suddenly and small and broken. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. You're right, about all of it. I was weak and I let Victoria convince me that we didn't need you, that we could just. I'm sorry." It was the apology I'd wanted to hear, but it was too late. Too little too late. Victoria, however, wasn't done fighting. "We're not signing anything," she declared. "You can't bully us into giving up everything. We'll take our chances in court." "Victoria," Greer said quietly, "I need to speak with you and Richard privately." They excused themselves and left the conference room. Through the glass wall, I could see them arguing in the hallway. Victoria was gesturing angrily. Greer was speaking firmly, showing them something on his phone, probably research on patent law cases. Richard just looked defeated. Marcus leaned over to me. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," I said, and I was surprised to find it was true. Seeing them squirm, seeing Victoria's perfect composure crack, seeing Richard finally understand what he'd lost, it was cathartic. The hollow, empty feeling was completely gone now. I felt powerful, in control, like I'd finally taken back everything they'd tried to steal. They were gone for almost 20 minutes. When they came back, Victoria's face was a mask of barely controlled rage, but she was silent. Richard looked like he'd aged 10 years. Greer spoke for them. "We need time to review this proposal with our financial advisors and consider all the implications. This is a major decision." "You have 48 hours, Marcus said. "After that, the offer is off the table and we proceed with litigation and the injunction." "That's not enough time," Victoria protested. "It's more than you gave Ms. Mitchell when you fired her," Marcus replied. 48 hours, take it or leave it." We stood to leave. I gathered my things, and as I turned toward the door, Richard called out, "Sarah, wait, please." Against my better judgment, I paused and looked back at him. "I really am sorry," he said. "I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that. You deserved better, you deserved loyalty. I failed you and I'm sorry." I studied his face. The remorse looked genuine, but it didn't matter. Sorry doesn't unshirt a contract. Sorry doesn't undo the humiliation. Sorry doesn't erase the betrayal. "I hope it was worth it," I said quietly and walked out. The next 48 hours crawled by. Marcus assured me they'd accept the offer. They had no real choice, but I couldn't shake the anxiety. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for them to find some loophole or some way to turn the tables back on me. But on hour 47, Greer called Marcus. Chen Industries agreed to the terms. They would transfer ownership of the company to me in exchange for releasing them from liability for the patent infringement. We'd need a few weeks to finalize all the legal paperwork, but the deal was done. I'd won. The actual transfer took 6 weeks to complete. 6 weeks of lawyers and paperwork and due diligence. 6 weeks of watching Richard and Victoria slowly, painfully extract themselves from the company they'd tried to take from me. The day the final papers were signed was surreal. I walked into the Chen Industries building, my building now, as the owner. The same building I'd been escorted out of by security just 2 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I'd asked Marcus to be there with me, and he'd brought a bottle of champagne for afterwards. But first, there was business to handle. I called an all-staff meeting in the main production area. Everyone gathered: the production workers, the sales team, the administrative staff, my former lab assistants. People were confused, whispering among themselves about what was happening. Rumors had been flying for weeks about major changes at the company. I stood on a small platform where supervisors usually gave safety briefings and looked out at the sea of faces. Some curious, some worried, some hopeful. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," I began. "Some of you know me as the former head of R&D who left the company a few months ago. What most of you don't know is that I'm the inventor of the biodegradable polymer that this company manufactures. I own the patent, and as of today, I also own this company." The murmurs grew louder. I held up a hand for quiet. "I know there's been a lot of uncertainty lately. I know you're worried about your jobs and the future of this company, so let me be very clear. If you're here because you do good work and you contribute to this company's success, your job is safe. I'm not here to destroy what we've built. I'm here to make it better." Relief washed over many faces. But I wasn't done. "However, there will be changes. This company forgot where its success came from. It forgot that innovation and the people behind that innovation are what matter. We're going to refocus on what made this material special in the first place, the fact that it's not just a product, it's a solution to a global problem. We're going to invest more in research and development. We're going to treat our employees with the respect they deserve. And we're going to build something that lasts, not just something that makes a quick profit." I paused, scanning the crowd. "I know some of you witnessed my termination. I know it was humiliating for everyone involved. I want you to know that kind of management, that kind of treatment of people, ends today. We're going to do better. I'm going to do better." The applause started small but grew. Not everyone was convinced. I could see the skepticism on some faces, but it was a start. After the meeting, I made my way to the executive office, Richard's old office, the place where Victoria had shredded my contract and told me I was nothing, the place where this whole nightmare had started. I sat down in the chair behind the desk, my desk now, and just breathed for a moment. The view from the window overlooked the production floor where my material was being manufactured at scale. My invention, my vision, my company. Marcus knocked on the open door. "How does it feel?" "Unreal," I admitted. 2 months ago, I was on my apartment floor crying because I thought I'd lost everything. Now I own a $50 million company. "You didn't just own it," Marcus corrected, coming in and setting down the champagne bottle. "You earned it. You created something valuable, and when someone tried to steal it from you, you fought back and won. Be proud of that." He was right. This wasn't handed to me. I'd fought for it. Every step of the way, from the 8 years of development in my garage to the battle to reclaim what was mine, I'd earned this. We popped the champagne and toasted to new beginnings. But even in that moment of victory, I knew the real work was just starting. Owning the company was one thing. Running it successfully was another. The first few months were brutal. I had to learn aspects of business I'd never dealt with before: finance, operations, sales strategies, human resources. I hired good people to help me, including a COO with 20 years of experience who could handle the day-to-day operations while I focused on the strategic direction and the technical innovation. I also made some immediate changes. I increased wages for the production workers and improved benefits across the board. I tripled the R&D budget and hired 3 more researchers. I instituted a profit-sharing program so that everyone who contributed to the company's success would benefit from it. Some of the old guard pushed back. The sales director who'd been there since Richard's early days told me I was being too generous, that I'd cut into profits. I fired him and promoted someone from within who understood that taking care of employees was an investment, not an expense. Word spread in the industry about what had happened, about how I'd been fired and then ended up owning the company. Some people thought it was a brilliant power play. Others thought I was vindictive and ruthless. I didn't really care about either opinion. I knew what had happened, and I knew I'd done what I had to do. The question everyone wanted to know was, what happened to Richard and Victoria? Richard had walked away from the deal with his personal assets intact, his house, his investments, his savings. He was still wealthy by any normal standard, but losing the company broke something in him. I heard through mutual contacts that he'd become withdrawn, that his marriage was falling apart, that he spent most of his time alone. Part of me felt sorry for him. He'd made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I believed his remorse was genuine. He'd been weak and let Victoria manipulate him, and he'd paid an enormous price for that weakness. Victoria, though, I felt nothing for her but cold satisfaction. She'd gone into the situation thinking she was so clever that she could just dispose of the inconvenient woman who'd been part of her husband's life before her. She'd been so certain that power and cruelty would win. Finding out she destroyed her husband's company through her own arrogance and ignorance must have been devastating. I heard they divorced about 6 months after the company transfer. Victoria had married Richard for his money and status, and when both were significantly diminished, she had no reason to stay. She walked away with whatever she got in the divorce settlement and disappeared from my radar entirely. Richard reached out once, about a year after everything settled. A short email, simple and direct. He congratulated me on the company's continued success. We'd grown another 30% in the first year under my leadership, and repeated his apology. He didn't ask for anything, didn't try to reconnect, just wanted me to know he was genuinely happy I'd succeeded. I wrote back an even shorter reply. "Thank you, I hope you find peace." And I meant it. My revenge was never about destroying Richard as a person. It was about reclaiming what was mine and making sure he understood the cost of his betrayal. That was done now. The company continued to thrive. Within 2 years, we'd expanded into international markets. Within 3 years, major corporations were replacing their traditional plastic packaging with our biodegradable alternative. The environmental impact was measurable and significant. We'd kept millions of pounds of conventional plastic out of landfills and oceans. And that, more than the money or the revenge or the vindication, was what mattered to me. I'd created something that was actually making the world better. Something that was solving the problem I'd spent 8 years obsessing over in my garage. The patent that Victoria had never known existed, the one that she'd been so confident didn't matter because she thought the company owned it, that patent became one of the most valuable in the sustainable materials industry. Estimates put its total value at over $180 million, and it was mine. I expanded beyond just manufacturing. I licensed the technology to other companies in different industries, always maintaining strict quality control and environmental standards. Each licensing deal brought in millions more. I invested heavily in research for new sustainable materials, building an entire innovation division dedicated to finding solutions to environmental problems. 5 years after taking over the company, I rebranded it. It wasn't Chen Industries anymore. It was Mitchell Materials, and our mission statement was simple: innovation for a sustainable future. I gave talks at conferences and universities. Young women, especially young women in STEM fields, would come up to me afterward and tell me my story inspired them, that it showed them they didn't have to let people walk all over them, that they could fight back and win. I always told them the same thing: know your worth, protect your work, and never ever let someone make you feel like you're nothing, because you're not. You're everything. You just have to be brave enough to prove it. Looking back now, 7 years after Victoria shredded that contract, I can see how every piece of the journey was necessary. The years of struggle to develop the material taught me perseverance. The partnership with Richard taught me the value of contracts and protecting my interests. The betrayal taught me strength I didn't know I had. And the revenge, the fight to reclaim what was mine, that taught me that I was capable of far more than I'd ever imagined. People sometimes ask me if I regret how things went down, if I wish I could have resolved it differently, more peacefully. The answer is complicated. Do I wish Richard and Victoria had never betrayed me? Of course. It would have been easier, less painful if our partnership had continued successfully. But would I have grown into the leader I became without that crucible? Would I have fought so hard for control if it had just been handed to me? Would I have appreciated what I had if I'd never lost it? Probably not. The truth is, sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the catalyst for the best things we accomplish. Victoria thought she was destroying me when she tore up that contract. She thought she was throwing away trash when she had me escorted out of the building. But what she actually did was unleash someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. She made the classic mistake of underestimating someone she saw as weak. She looked at me and saw a desperate scientist who needed Richard's help, someone who should be grateful for whatever scraps they threw her way. She never saw the woman who'd spent 8 years chasing an impossible dream through sheer stubborn determination. She never understood that the same drive that created the patent was the same drive that would destroy anyone who tried to take it from me. And that was her downfall. The lesson I learned, the one I try to pass on to everyone who asks, is this: your power doesn't come from other people's approval or from the positions they give you. Your power comes from what you create, what you know, and what you're willing to fight for. Protect that power, document it, legally secure it, and never sign it away to people who don't truly value you. That patent, that simple piece of paper that Victoria never knew existed, was worth more than any contract. Because contracts can be torn up, literally, as I learned, but legal ownership, properly documented and protected, that's forever. I also learned something about revenge. People talk about revenge like it's always destructive, like it's always toxic and consuming. And maybe sometimes it is. But my revenge wasn't about hurting people for the sake of hurting them. It was about justice. It was about making sure that people who did wrong faced consequences. It was about reclaiming what was stolen and rebuilding something better from the ashes. There's a difference between revenge and justice, and the difference is this: revenge is about making someone suffer. Justice is about making things right. What I did was justice. Did Richard and Victoria suffer? Yes, but they suffered consequences they'd earned through their own actions. I didn't fabricate evidence or destroy them through lies. I simply used the legal rights I'd had all along, the ones they'd forgotten about or never known existed, to protect what was mine. And from that protection came growth. Not just for me, but for everyone involved with the company. The employees who got better wages and benefits. The researchers who got to pursue innovative solutions. The environment that benefited from millions of pounds of conventional plastic being replaced. The young entrepreneurs who licensed the technology and built their own sustainable businesses. One person's downfall became 100 people's opportunity. That's not just revenge. That's transformation. Today, I'm 41 years old. I run a company worth over $200 million. I hold 17 patents in sustainable materials. I've been featured in Forbes, in Time, in every major business publication. I've spoken at the United Nations about environmental innovation. I've funded scholarships for women in STEM fields, making sure that other young scientists have an easier path than I did. But you know what I'm most proud of? It's not the money or the recognition or even the environmental impact, though all of those matter. What I'm most proud of is that I didn't break. When Victoria told me I was nothing, I could have believed her. When they threw me out, I could have given up. When the situation looked impossible, I could have walked away. But I didn't. I fought. I used every resource I had, my knowledge, my legal rights, my sheer stubborn refusal to let them win, and I turned my lowest moment into my greatest triumph. So if you're watching this and you've ever been betrayed, ever been told you don't matter, ever been thrown away by people you trusted, I want you to hear this. They're wrong. You matter. Your work matters. Your worth isn't determined by how other people treat you. It's determined by what you know you're capable of and what you're willing to do to prove it. Protect yourself. Document everything. Know your legal rights. Surround yourself with good advisors who actually care about your interests. And if someone tries to take what's yours, don't just accept it. Fight back with everything you have. You might be surprised by how much power you actually hold. You might be surprised by how strong you actually are. I know I was. That contract Victoria shredded was just paper. The real power was always in the patent, in the creation, in the mind that invented something the world needed. She destroyed a contract, but she couldn't destroy me, and in trying to, she destroyed herself instead. That's the thing about power. Real power can't be torn up or thrown away. It can only be claimed by the person brave enough to stand up and say, "This is mine, and you can't have it." I claimed mine, and I've never looked back. Sometimes late at night, when I'm working in my office, a much bigger, much nicer office than Richard ever had, I think about that moment on my apartment floor, crying because I thought my life was over. I think about how broken I felt, how powerless, how destroyed. And then I look around at everything I've built, everything I've accomplished, all the lives I've impacted, and I realize something important. That breaking was necessary. That destruction was necessary. Because you can't rebuild yourself into something stronger if you never break in the first place. Victoria broke me, but in breaking me, she gave me permission to rebuild myself into someone who couldn't be broken again. Someone who knew her worth and refused to accept anything less than she deserved. So thank you, Victoria, wherever you are. Thank you for shredding that contract. Thank you for showing me exactly who you were. Thank you for underestimating me so completely that you handed me the opportunity to take everything. You tried to destroy me. Instead, you made me unstoppable. And to everyone watching this, everyone who's ever been where I was, feeling small and powerless and defeated, remember this. The person who tried to destroy you might just be handing you the opportunity to become who you were always meant to be. The breakdown might be the breakthrough. The ending might be the beginning. You just have to be brave enough to see it, brave enough to fight for it, brave enough to claim what's yours and never let go. That's my story. That's how I went from having my contract shredded to owning a $200 million company. That's how I turned betrayal into victory and revenge into justice. And if I can do it, so can you. Never forget that. Never forget your power. Never forget your worth. Because the moment you forget is the moment someone like Victoria will try to take it from you. And you deserve so much better than that. You deserve everything you've worked for, so fight for it, claim it, own it. And never, ever let anyone tell you you're nothing, because you're everything. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who needs to hear it. I hope it gives you strength when you feel weak and courage when you feel afraid. You've got this. I promise you, you've got this. Now go out there and show the world what you're made of. I'll be rooting for you every step of the way. 3 years after everything settled, something unexpected happened that brought the entire story full circle in a way I never could have anticipated. I was at a green technology conference in Seattle, the same city where I'd first met Richard at that tiny booth in the back corner of an expo hall. Except this time, I wasn't the desperate inventor with homemade brochures hoping someone would listen. I was the keynote speaker. The conference center was packed. Over 2,000 people had registered to hear me talk about sustainable innovation and the future of biodegradable materials. As I stood backstage waiting for my introduction, I felt that familiar flutter of nerves mixed with excitement. I'd given hundreds of talks by this point, but it never got completely routine. Each audience represented new opportunities, new connections, new possibilities. What I didn't know was that Richard was in that audience. I didn't see him during my speech. I was focused on my presentation, on connecting with the crowd, on sharing not just the technical details of our materials, but the philosophy behind them. I talked about thinking long-term, about building businesses that solve problems rather than create them, about the responsibility we have as innovators to consider the impact of everything we create. The speech was well received, standing ovation. Dozens of people lined up afterward to ask questions, exchange business cards, pitch collaboration ideas. I was energized by it, by the genuine enthusiasm and the meaningful conversations. This was why I did what I did, not for the money or the recognition, but for moments like this when I could see my work inspiring others to think differently. I was talking with a young engineer from Taiwan about licensing possibilities when someone tapped my shoulder. I turned around and froze. Richard stood there, looking older and grayer than I remembered, but somehow more peaceful. He was dressed casually, jeans and a blazer, no tie, and he held a copy of the conference program rolled up in his hand. His eyes met mine, and I saw genuine warmth there, no resentment, no anger. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly. "That was an incredible speech. Would you have a few minutes to talk? I understand if you don't want to." "Give me 10 minutes to finish up here," I heard myself saying. I wasn't sure why I agreed. Maybe curiosity. Maybe closure I didn't know I still needed. Maybe just the sense that enough time had passed that we could finally have an honest conversation without all the pain and anger clouding everything. I wrapped up my conversations and met Richard at a quiet corner of the conference center cafe. We sat across from each other at a small table, and for a moment neither of us spoke. It was surreal, sitting across from him again after all this time. The last time we'd been in the same room was in that conference room where I'd taken his company. The last time we'd really talked, he'd been apologizing while his whole world crumbled. "How have you been?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. "Honest answer," Richard smiled ruefully. "It's been a journey. After everything happened, after the divorce, I went through a pretty dark period. Depression, a lot of therapy, a lot of confronting things about myself I'd been avoiding for years." "I'm sorry," I said, and I was surprised to find I meant it. "Don't be," he replied. "I needed it. I needed to hit bottom to figure out who I actually was when I wasn't building a business or trying to please a woman who never actually cared about me. The company was my identity for so long, and when it was gone, I had to figure out who Richard Chen was without it." "And did you figure it out?" He nodded slowly. "I think so. I do consulting now, helping small manufacturers improve their operations. Nothing glamorous. I make maybe 1/10 of what I used to make. But I'm actually happy. I help people build sustainable businesses. I mentor young entrepreneurs. I have time for things I never had time for before: reading, hiking, volunteering. I'm dating someone, a teacher, and she has no idea what Chen Industries was or how much money I used to have, and that's exactly how I want it." I studied his face as he talked. He was telling the truth. The lines around his eyes were from smiling now, not stress. There was a lightness to him that hadn't been there before, even in the good days of our partnership. "I'm glad," I said. "Really, I'm glad you found peace." "I saw what you've done with the company," Richard continued. "The expansion, the new innovations, the social programs. You've made it into something better than it ever was when I ran it. You were always the visionary, Sarah. I was just the businessman. And not even a very good one, as it turned out, since I let my personal life destroy what we'd built." "We both played our parts," I said. "You gave me an opportunity when I desperately needed one. The first 2 years of our partnership were good, real. I learned a lot from you about business, about navigating industries I knew nothing about. That foundation helped me when I had to take over." "Still," Richard said, "I owe you an apology that's bigger than the one I gave you in that conference room. Not just for what happened at the end, but for not standing up to Victoria sooner. I saw what she was doing, how she was undermining you, and I told myself I was keeping the peace. But really I was just being a coward. I chose the easy path instead of the right path, and you paid the price for my weakness." His voice cracked slightly on those last words, and I could see the genuine remorse etched into every line of his face. This wasn't a performance. This was a man who'd spent years thinking about his mistakes and genuinely regretting them. "I forgave you a long time ago," I said, and as the words came out, I realized they were true. I was angry for a while, hurt, betrayed, but at some point I realized that holding onto that anger was only hurting me. You made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but they taught me things I needed to learn. They made me stronger. In a weird way, the betrayal was a gift. "That's very generous of you," Richard said with a sad smile. "I'm not sure I deserve that forgiveness." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But I'm not giving it to you because you deserve it. I'm giving it to you because I deserve peace. And I can't have peace while I'm still carrying around resentment and bitterness. So I let it go. Not for you, for me." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of complicated history hanging between us. Then Richard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully and slid it across the table. It was a check, made out to the Mitchell Foundation, the nonprofit I'd established to fund STEM education for underprivileged young women. The amount made my eyes widen. $500,000. Richard, I can't accept this. Yes, you can, he interrupted gently. It's not charity and it's not guilt money. It's an investment in the future I should have been investing in all along. When I heard about your foundation, about the scholarships and programs you're funding, I realized that's the kind of impact I wish I'd made when I had the resources. Now I have a little bit of resources again, and I want to use them the right way this time. I looked at the check, then back at him. This is a lot of money. It's the right amount, he said firmly. Please, let me do this one thing right. Let me contribute to the legacy you're building. I can't undo the past, but maybe I can help fund a better future. I picked up the check, folded it carefully, and put it in my purse. Thank you. This will send at least 20 young women to college, 20 future engineers and scientists and innovators who might not have had the chance otherwise. Good, Richard said, and his smile was genuine now. That's exactly what I hoped for. We talked for another hour. Not about the past, not about the betrayal or the revenge or any of the painful parts. We talked about his consulting work and the young companies he was helping. We talked about my research division's latest projects. We talked about the state of the sustainable materials industry and where we saw it going. We talked like colleagues who respected each other, which was something I'd thought we'd never be again. As we were getting ready to leave, Richard said something that stuck with me. You know what the therapist told me? She said that sometimes we have to lose everything to find out what actually matters. I spent 20 years building Chen Industries, and I thought that was everything. My identity, my worth, my legacy. And when I lost it, I thought my life was over. He paused, looking out the window at the Seattle skyline. But it wasn't over. It was just changing into something different. Something better, actually. Because now my worth isn't tied to how much money I make or how big my company is. My worth is tied to how I treat people, how I help others, how I show up in the world. And that's something nobody can take from me. I understood exactly what he meant. I'd gone through my own version of that transformation when Victoria fired me. That moment on my apartment floor when I'd felt like I'd lost everything had actually been the moment I'd started finding my real strength. I think that's what most people don't understand about rock bottom, I said. It's not the end. It's just the foundation of whatever you build next, and sometimes you need to hit it to realize you're strong enough to push back up. Exactly, Richard agreed. And you pushed back up further than anyone could have imagined. I'm proud of you, Sarah. I know I don't have the right to say that anymore, but I am. What you've built, what you've accomplished, the way you've used your success to lift others up, that's what a real legacy looks like. We exchanged a handshake that turned into a brief hug. There was closure in that moment. Not forgiveness that erased the past, but acceptance that allowed us both to move forward without the weight of old resentments. As I watched Richard walk away through the conference center crowd, I felt something shift inside me. The last little piece of anger I'd been carrying, the tiny kernel of resentment I'd held onto even when I thought I'd let it all go, finally dissolved. He wasn't the enemy anymore. He was just a man who'd made mistakes and learned from them, same as everyone else. That night, I called Marcus to tell him about the encounter. He'd become more than my attorney over the years. He was a friend and mentor, someone who'd seen me at my lowest and helped me fight my way back up. How do you feel about it? He asked after I'd told him the whole story. Surprised, I admitted. And good. Really good, actually. Seeing him doing well, seeing that he'd learned and grown from everything that happened, it gave me something I didn't know I needed. What's that? Proof that it's possible to come back from your worst mistakes, I said. Richard did terrible things. He betrayed me. He chose his wife over our partnership. He let me be humiliated and thrown out. And for a long time, I saw him as irredeemable because of that. But he's not. He did the work. He faced his failures. He rebuilt himself into someone better. And if he can do that, then anyone can. That's a good lesson, Marcus said thoughtfully. Redemption is possible if people are willing to do the work. Yeah, I agreed. And it makes me think about Victoria, too. I haven't thought about her in years. I don't know where she is or what she's doing. Part of me hopes she's miserable, which I know isn't particularly enlightened of me. But another part of me hopes she learned something too. That maybe losing everything taught her that you can't just use people and throw them away without consequences. Maybe, Marcus said. Or maybe some people never learn. But that's not your responsibility. You did what you needed to do to protect yourself and reclaim what was yours. What they do with their lives after that is up to them. He was right, of course. I couldn't control whether Victoria ever realized the error of her ways. I couldn't control whether she grew as a person or remained the same cruel, manipulative woman who'd torn up my contract. All I could control was my own path forward. And my path was looking pretty good. A few weeks after the conference, I was going through grant applications for the Mitchell Foundation when I came across one that stopped me in my tracks. The applicant was a 23-year-old chemical engineering student from a small town in Nebraska. She'd been working on a new type of water filtration system that could remove microplastics from waterways. Her essay about why she needed the scholarship was almost identical to my own story. Years of obsessive work, multiple jobs to fund her research, people telling her she was wasting her time, but an unshakable belief that she could solve an important problem. I approved her application immediately and added a personal note asking her to call me. When we spoke a few days later, I heard the same passion in her voice that I remembered feeling at her age. The same determination. The same refusal to give up even when the path was impossibly hard. I want to fund your research fully, I told her. Scholarship for your final year of school, plus a grant to continue your work after graduation. And when you're ready to bring your filtration system to market, I want to talk about partnership opportunities. She was crying by the time I finished. I don't know what to say. This changes everything. I know exactly how you feel, I said with a smile. Someone gave me a chance once. It didn't work out the way either of us expected, but that chance set me on the path to where I am now. So I'm paying it forward. Take this opportunity and run with it. Build something amazing. And someday, when you're successful, find another young woman with an impossible dream and give her a chance too. I will, she promised. I absolutely will. That conversation reminded me why everything I'd been through mattered. The struggle, the betrayal, the revenge, the victory, all of it led to this moment where I could change someone's life the way I'd once hoped someone would change mine. Except I was doing it better, without the strings and conditions and vulnerabilities that had nearly cost me everything. Richard had given me a chance, yes, but he'd also kept control. He'd made me dependent on him, on his company, on his resources, and when push came to shove, that dependence had made me vulnerable to Victoria's cruelty. I wasn't going to do that. The young women I helped through my foundation would own their own work, their own patents, their own power. I'd give them resources without taking their autonomy. I'd provide support without creating dependency. I'd be the mentor I wished I'd had. Looking back now, 8 years after the day Victoria shredded my contract, I can see the entire arc of the journey with clarity I didn't have while I was living through it. Every piece was necessary. Every pain had purpose. Every setback set up the next breakthrough. If Victoria had never fired me, I probably would have stayed in that partnership indefinitely. I would have been successful, yes, but always in Richard's shadow. Always the brilliant inventor, but never the leader. Always valued, but never in control. I would have made good money and done good work, but I never would have reached my full potential. Her cruelty forced me to step into my power in a way nothing else could have. It forced me to fight, to claim what was mine, to become the leader and visionary I was always meant to be but was too comfortable to become. So in the strangest way, Victoria gave me a gift, not intentionally, not kindly, but a gift nonetheless. She showed me exactly how strong I was. She proved that I didn't need Richard or anyone else to succeed. She pushed me off a cliff, and instead of falling, I learned to fly. And now I'm soaring, higher than I ever imagined possible. Not just financially, though Mitchell Materials is now valued at over $300 million. Not just professionally, though I've achieved recognition I never dreamed of, but personally, emotionally, spiritually. I know who I am now. I know what I'm worth. I know what I'm capable of. And nobody, not Victoria, not Richard, not anyone, can ever take that knowledge away from me. That's the real victory, not the company or the money or the revenge. The real victory is becoming unshakable, becoming someone who knows her power and won't be diminished by anyone's opinion or actions. Becoming someone who can be knocked down and always get back up stronger. So here's what I want you to take away from my story. Whatever you're going through right now, whatever betrayal or setback or disaster you're facing, it's not the end. It's just the middle. The hardest part, yes. The part where you can't see how things could possibly work out, but not the end. The end is what you build from the ashes. The end is who you become when you refuse to stay down. The end is the moment you look back and realize that the worst thing that ever happened to you was actually the beginning of the best thing you ever did. Your contract might get shredded. Your partnership might be betrayed. Your trust might be broken. But if you know your worth, if you protect your power, if you refuse to give up, you'll discover that you're capable of far more than you ever imagined. And someday, you'll be exactly where I am now, telling your story, helping others, building something meaningful from the ruins of what you lost. That's my promise to you. That's my gift to everyone who hears this story and sees themselves in my struggle. You are not nothing. You are everything, and you're going to prove it. Now go, fight, build, soar. Your story isn't over. It's just beginning.